Hello, thank you so much for joining me today for this interview with me, Nandini Chatterjee, for the project Cast in Stone. Will you be so kind to tell me your name and your profession, how you came to be interested in the statue of Robert Clive in Shrewsbury?
Yeah, my name's Alexander Holmes Brown. Besides being a waiter at a restaurant, I run an organization focused on us who've come from different places to Shropshire. So that's Shropshire Ethnic Minority Alliance. It's soon to have a name change to Shropshire Equality Means Action because we've got a bigger mandate now, wider issues that we're interested in, including all types of equality, diversity, and inclusion. My background's as a youth worker in schools and chaplaincy and child protection. So I came to Shropshire maybe could have been 8 years ago. And one of the first things I noticed was the statue of Robert Clive in the town square. I don't suppose I knew the name until I questioned, oh, who's this Robert Clive? And then upon finding out, oh, this guy's a really nefarious character involved at the height of colonialism. In fact, like the leader of the East India Company. And knowing that history, I thought, wow, this is incredible that they have such a thug and a pillager right here, pride of place in the town square. So I always felt horrible about the statue. I always wanted to do something. I often joked that we ought to tear it down with no real intentions of doing so. And that was long before the moment where statues were being toppled. And so when that moment came, when Colston was toppled, when Black Lives Matter protests were erupting all over the world, and also right here in Shropshire and in Telford Wrekin councils, then the issue of the statue started to gain attention in wider circles and became the topic of two major petitions. And my organization and a coalition of organizations took up the cause and took it to Shropshire County Council in order to have some sort of action on either the removal of the statue or the placement of a plaque, a description of who this character is and what he really did, or or the alternative, just to keep the status quo. But my organization, Shropshire Ethnic Minority Alliance, and that coalition really focused in on the statue in June 2020 and July 2020.
Thank you so much. It's really useful to have this summary that you've just provided. If you will permit me, may I take you a little bit back in your narrative and invite you to tell me a little bit more about yourself in the sense of your family background, your experience of moving to Shropshire, and so on.
Yeah, okay. So my family background is that my parents are from Shrewsbury. They're both born here, but my grandparents, their parents came over as migrants on my father's side from Argentina and on my mother's side from southern Italy. Well, at least her mother. Her father was English. So both of them experienced a sort of a dislocation in that sense, even as being born here. On my father's side, he was one of the kids born here. Some others were born back in the old country. And on my mum, in my mother's experience, it was the experience of growing up as a very dark-skinned person, very perceived as other and different and racialized because of that. Growing up in Shropshire at a time when there weren't many people from elsewhere. Because of also other issues to do with language, especially with her mother and healthcare, the lack of care, and sort of some really bad stuff. Because of that, we always grew up aware of these kind of dynamics. So that was always part of our story. And I grew up in Australia in a very racialized very divided, very apartheid society. The racism there is to me was so obvious. Was it really hurt? It was like the worst injustice all the time, everywhere, and no one seemed to talk about it or notice it. It was very normalized. So I grew up very angry, very mad. My heroes as a child were people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Tupac Shakur, and I was full of rage. And well, I suppose that never has stopped. So even as I went from being a very anger-filled youth headed in the wrong direction to becoming a youth worker myself within the church, especially the church sort of saved my life from going in a bad direction. I still had these questions like, what's going on in the society? And within the church, I focused in on our exclusions of LGBTQ plus folks, like and what seemed to be an internal apartheid in the church. And I was focused on the Zionism in the church because I was a big supporter of Palestinian rights. And all of this ended up getting me booted out of the evangelical church. So when I arrived in England, I was even more, I was madder than ever. And I came to a small town, a very white town, a very conservative county at the height of Brexit. And whatever I thought about Brexit, and I wasn't sure about all of the details of what that meant politically, what it meant coming to Shropshire was, for example, on the very first week of arriving here, walking into town past a pub, just at the very moment when a load of if you like hooligans who had been at the pub, well, a big group of nationalists, we should say, who'd been at the pub were just exiting on their way into town on a march, chanting, "Stick Islam up your ass." And here I was, still tan from Australia, a big beard, and dressed formally because I was going to a job interview, and I just stuck out right there. And I was in the middle of a anti-Islam rally because we were having a building being renovated for a prayer hall, an old post office renovated for a prayer hall. So I came to this kind of sentiment, and in Shropshire experienced lots of, coming from Australia where I'm white, and here of course I'm still white, but I'm being perceived quite differently, just about being perceived as just about anything that somebody wanted me to be, whether that was Eastern European, whether that was Middle Eastern, just different foreign because of accent, because of something in the way I walk or look. I couldn't perceive it, but it was perceived. And so there I am, and I'm just starting to make some friends. And one friend who is Ghanaian in background, from a family with one white parent and one black parent, growing up here, had experienced so much that is not my business to talk about, but just, I will say, experienced a whole lot of what it means to grow up with his sister as the only two black kids in an all-white school, where policies, where bullying, not only from students, but from teachers and from police and from authorities, where perceptions of you, impositions on you, just operate with impunity. And that was one thing that we kept on coming back to in our conversations, was how racism in Shropshire seems to operate with complete impunity. There was no recourse to justice because any of us who are from elsewhere are so few, and we don't know each other necessarily. So we had the idea that we need to do something about this, and so began SEMA, Shropshire Ethnic Minority Alliance, the name wasn't one that we particularly loved. We just had to choose a name, right? It's like when you start a band as a kid, you could spend a half a year trying to think up the perfect name. Well, we just started with what we could. And we started with an academic conference on racism in education, which was something close to both of us. And that was in 2020, before the COVID lockdowns, just before them. And really just maybe 6 months perhaps before the eruption of Black Lives Matter protests. And so we opened with a bang, a conference that was wonderful, 2-day conference that this county has never seen anything like it. It took a lot of organizing, and then lockdown, and our momentum just dashed straight away. However, when it was opening up as partially a partial ease of restrictions, the same time was protests across this nation and across the world. And so it was time for our organization to get back involved, especially with the local youth movements, who were operating ad hoc just as they could, to do something under their banners of Black Lives Matter. SEMA came in with a bit of our organizational wisdom. We didn't have much, but we're a little bit older, in order to help out with that. And it was at that stage as well that attention started turning to the statue.
Thank you so much. It was painful to listen to this, actually, about what you've been through, what your friend has been through, and what that represents. But thank you for sharing that. And I really admire how you transformed that pain and that rage into something so productive. Thank you for doing that. To something much less inspiring, if we may say that, about the statue itself. You said when you came to Shrewsbury, you noticed the statue straight away and found it odd. And then you found out about who the person was. Even if it's something very simple, would you like to just share how you found out about who Robert Clive was and what he had done, and what was the process of learning?
I think I must have just, back then there was the name Clive, I think just one word on the statue, Clive, which has since been removed. So when they put up our information panel, they, which is interestingly sort of adjacent to the statue, facing the direction of perhaps the least visibility. But when they attached our plaque, they removed Clive from the front of the statue. But I think I must have just Googled, because I'm a voracious, I need to know, especially when it comes to history. It's my love. But the EIC I was no stranger to. Colonialism was the topic that I was most interested in, perhaps, and with family connections to India as well. Perhaps it even piqued my interest even more that they would have this kind of person. I mean, it's a really big statue. It's very prominent in the town square. And so I was also interested in, like, who decided upon this? Like, when was this a good idea? And it struck me as interesting as well that I suppose, even though I'd come to Shrewsbury in Shropshire and found a place that seemed to me backwards, parochial, conservative, racist, and lots of good things too. I mean, lots of beautiful things. But I'd come to this very strange place, even though it's my parents' hometown and I'm not quite a stranger, and I have lots of family here. But I come to this strange place at a strange time in my life. But I was interested at that moment as well in terms of locating little Shropshire in a global scene, because we're not just an isolated little island, a little county in the middle of the River Severn and surrounded by peaks and mountains and hills. We're part of a global economy that at one time was operating, well, still is operating rapaciously across the world. And so I became interested in the relationship of this county to the textile industry, this county to the empire, and what else might be going on, what other history, what other objects might be around that tell part of this story of industrialism, the story of plunder. And there are other places. There are other places, including museums full of looted, beautiful objects and artifacts taken from India. My sister's adopted from India, and when we went around Palace Castle for the first time, I joked to her. I said, "You see this stuff here? This is yours." And sure enough, some of it's hard to find, but yeah, even in this county, right bang in the middle of England, on the Welsh border and not close to the seas or the ports, but on a river, is part of a global system.
You're so wonderfully articulate. I wish I could have articulated it like this to myself. Now that we have recorded it, perhaps this will actually become a teaching resource for students. Thank you so much for being so clear-sighted. I have one very minor follow-up question on that one, because I'm curious as a teacher. So in Australia, did they actually teach you the history of the British Empire in school? Was that part of the curriculum?
No, not really at all. In Australia, part of the when I grew up, growing up in Western Australia, I'm born 1990, which is not long ago. I know I'm very young, but 1990, the 1990s in Western Australia is a very different place. I'm not sure what they're teaching today, but we're talking about a frontier society in Perth, in Western Australia. Perth, I should say Boorloo, the name which it had before we came and occupied and took over everything. It's a strange place. In school, we would learn the most patronizing education about what the British Empire and then what the Australian settler colonial society as its own. We have to take responsibility for ourselves. I'm an Australian. It's not the British anymore who have responsibility there. It's now me and my generation who could do differently. But in both senses, what we learned about a white settler colonial society and the indigenous people was the most patronizing education, the most patronizing attempt at anti-racist education you could imagine. So we learned that, well, weren't these people ingenious? They invented a didgeridoo and a boomerang, and look at these artifacts. They're very, very clever artifacts. And it was almost like in past tense. It was contextless. And it was the sort of stuff that you'd get out of the worst kind of how would you say, the worst kind of Orientalist anthropology of peoples, of tribes. It really was quite horrible. So we had teachers begrudgingly teach from very outdated textbooks about a topic that was like a topic that belonged in textbooks. And hardly any of that was related to people who today, at that very moment, and still today, were waging a political struggle against our very system that, you know, in which these schools and this education and these curriculums was in. So yeah, it wasn't really a strong education on the British Empire at all. We only had moments, perhaps, where they would talk about the sad going-ons of colonialism, you know, the unfortunate fallout of it, as if it was just an unfortunate thing that happened. And in fact, I guess that came up again in the some of the descriptions proposed for Clive, of which was to say that, you know, was business was going on, and unfortunately there were some victims. So that was sort of the way education was done in Australia when I grew up.
Thank you so much for confirming actually something that has come out in other interviews as well. And I do want to actually share some things with you back as well, because it's really meant to be a conversation. In an interview also with a Bangladeshi British activist, it's really the same story of actually learning this through family, through friends, rather than in the education system. So it's as if education happens outside the formal education system as far as colonialism is concerned.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, actually. Thank you for sharing. And also, like the democratizing role of the internet. I think you brought that up as well. I mean, as a really prime source of education for all of us, but it's self-led education, isn't it?
Yeah. I the internet was amazing for me, and you know, I just, when you start learning yourself and then you start looking, there's always more and more that just absolutely appalls you. And you say, it felt to me like we were living in a big crime scene, and that was a great big cover up because nobody was talking about it. What I think I ended up realizing later was that actually most people I grew up with didn't know. And it's not that they couldn't know. And it was a matter of choices as well. You choose not to see what you don't want to see. But I later think I've come to the conclusion that we were incapable of seeing what we were doing to other people, because if we were to see it, then the whole system would be called into question. Our whole very basis for being where we were. We would be settler colonists instead of just somebody born in Perth. The land that we'd be on would be stolen rather than just being purchased. So we don't dare see. And if you start to talk about it within institutions, particularly, for example, for myself, the church, what you do is not just expose something that's uncomfortable, but you make everyone complicit. And that's an awful thing to do to people. And you will quickly get shut down for doing so, because you can't make other people feel that level of complicity, especially if there's nothing that they can do about it. I mean, there's nothing that they can do, because what will we do? You know, relinquish power? Nobody does that. So that was the bind that I think Australian, like all settler societies, are in. You don't dare admit what's going on.
Thank you once again. Actually, that also brings us to the next question, which is about feelings. And you so astutely analyzed not only your own feelings about the settler colonial situation, like you described, but also why people, even if they have a choice, don't choose to see. Talking of seeing something very specific, just very very pointedly about the statue. You said you disliked it from the start. Could you tell me just a little bit about what you felt when you saw the statue, and also if you were open to sharing any of that, what others you observed seeing the statue, what did they feel or said they felt?
Yeah. What did I feel? I felt the statue. I think perhaps is like a humiliation. At the time, over the first years of living here, um, the the racism was, if there's one feeling, is this sense of humiliation, and I mean humiliation in the sense of being uh powerless to stop it, so therefore humiliated, no recourse to justice, um, so you're at the mercy of others, and so it's sort of a disempowering feeling. And then to have this towering, maybe to have a night out and another incident has happened, to go to a club and another thing, to be walking by yourself and to have ended up in a fight, or um to be driving back in a taxi and you're talking with the driver and you're both just talking about just how constant it is. That person says, yeah, it's 5 times every shift that I have a comment. And so you've got this sense of like a lament about how just constant this humiliation is. And then you drive past in that taxi, that big looming statue, or you walk past after an incident, and it's there is just a reminder of like this stuff goes way back and it seems so ingrained. And then you look at that statue and you think, man, they even erected a statue in celebration of the destruction of peoples. So yeah, that's how that felt. I suppose until the statue became a topic of big debate at the time that we'll end up talking about, I don't suppose I'd heard that many people's opinions on it. And if I did, I can't really recall them. I do remember at our conference, our first conference for our organization, I was with some of my guests. An unbelievable story. We were at the university on the first day of the conference, and I thought, where can I take our guests who are mostly Black British to in this town where we won't have an incident? And I had to think on it. Like I had to think, where's safe for us to go in Shrewsbury? And we chose a place that was just by the university centre, because it was a pretty, like, I don't know, maybe a bit more quiet, a bit more upmarket, not really the place where you're going to get the football lads in, and we'll stick out so much. I mean, we'll stick out, and we went in, and my friend taps me on the shoulder and says, look across at the bar, and you couldn't make this up. And I've never seen something this egregious in Shropshire. 2 guys in full blackface. They were off to some party, a dress-up party, or a stag's do, something along those lines. And I was just mortified. I had to go to the bartenders and explain to them that they're not going to serve these guys, right? They know better. We went next door to a Bangladeshi restaurant, and they refused to acknowledge the presence of one of my guests, who is very dark-skinned, Black African woman. They didn't bring her a plate, they didn't bring her drink, and then they didn't bring her food. And after 3 times, we thought, oh my goodness, what is going on? And then as we walked back after that first conference night, to a hotel I'd put them up in, a really nice place, that I'd forked out for, just to make sure everything was good. Where that same colleague, she heard herself referred to as the black girl. Oh no, sorry, the colored girl in room, whatever the room was, rather than she's a black woman, but the colored girl. On our way back, yeah, we walked past the statue, and I said, "Oh, by the way, this is Clive of India, Professor Reddy," and you could just see, like, he said, I see why you've started this organization and we're having this conference. It was just a madness. Everything seemed to be exposed that night. And I even had one friend joke to me, and he said, "Alex, how much did you pay to set all of that up to prove your point?" This was a white friend who was at the conference to support one of my colleagues, but perhaps hadn't really noticed all of this before. And he joked with me saying, Alex, you must have set this up, because all of these things in a row. But yeah, what that statue represented was walking back past it by yourself or with friends after a night where something's gone wrong, and it sort of mocks you. And I think I'm not the only person who's felt that way.
Thanks for sharing. I really have tears in my eyes right now. I'm really sorry you went through this, but I also recognize it. And I want to share something back with you, actually. The first time I went to Shrewsbury, and it was evening, and I was on my own. And luckily, like, no such nasty incident actually happened to me. But I saw the statue, and I felt frightened. That was my feeling. And then I went to my hotel, which was once again a very nice hotel and everything. And then there was like a visitor guide in the hotel. And one of the things, like, it had this statue in it, and it said like some wonderful things about Clive.
Wow.
And what a great person, and what a pride of the city he was, and all that. I literally remember shaking because I was so frightened. And I knew that this actually is 2023. It's not the time when Clive was out in Bengal causing so much death and destruction, but I still personally felt afraid. So, yeah, I'm sorry about that. But I recognize what you're saying to some extent.
Yeah, what you've said, it is fearful. I think when I would speak to friends who are local, who have been more hard of hearing for the kinds of things, I've wanted to say to them, you have friends at the pub, for example, because I work in pubs and clubs, and so you go and have a beer. And I've got friends who are sort of friends who would stand up for you if they saw someone bullying you. They would be the first to jump in. At the same time, when you call them friends, sometimes I think I wouldn't trust some of these people as far as I could throw them, because they have the same attitudes. They like me, but they don't like my people. I'm one of the ones that they like, but I know they wouldn't have liked my family when we first came over. But sometimes I try to explain to them what that means, that fear, or what it means to have a statue in the town square of somebody who felt they could act like and did act with that level of genocide against people who look just like my family, who are my family. What it means to have Churchill on a £5 note in this day and age. I mean, that was a recent decision to explain to them that they've turned their profile picture to a profile picture of Winston Churchill. in order to declare their, I don't know, their dedication to this country and the poppy and their symbols. And to say, look, I'm not trying to take your symbols, but I just want you to say, I want you to know that that person who you're making your symbol described my sister as less than a dog. Who described what went on in Australia is completely justified. That your symbol means death to the people that I love, and has meant that. And so I can't understand why you'd want to keep that safe rather than keep us safe. So also the statue becomes a divider, or becomes the highlighter of those divides, and who that sense of precariousness, precarity, that the sense of even the people that say that they know me, they don't, and even the people I think I know, I don't, because for them this is perfectly fine, and for us, I sometimes I'm using the royal we here. I mean, I come from different colonial aspects. Somewhere I'm, well, the most direct one where I am the colonizer. But I mean, I speak only for my ancestors, not for others. But also with the connection in my family, my sister being Indian, sometimes I want to say us, because I mean she's my sister, my love. So I don't want to use the royal we in the wrong way here, but maybe you understand what I'm saying. These people value their symbol. These people, who are they? Some people value these symbols over my flesh and blood, my sister, my people, and me.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining that. I hope people who listen to this also find it illuminating. Let's talk about the really, really productive and focused work that you did to channel all these frustrations and the humiliation, like you said. You've been trying to do a lot. You spoke about that, clearly inspiring, but also in some ways painful conference, which was a great start, and then pandemic happened. And of course, globally, then people were shocked. And when George Floyd was murdered, um, and Black Lives Matter took off across the world, at that time, what were you doing in relation to the statue? Because I knew you were doing a lot. Um, could you tell us about 2020 and your actions in relation to the statue and the council?
Sure. So the way I have it in my memory is that with George Floyd murdered on 25th of May, and then we had local Black Lives Matter rallies in the very beginning of June. So the 4th of June and the 6th of June were our first two. And then on the 7th of June, it's when we had Colston toppled in Bristol. At this stage, also June 7th is when the two major petitions go up on change.org to do with Clive. And within the next week, it's when we have right-wing patriots out defending the statue, really gathered around the statue. And so that's when our statue, that's when the Clive statue starts to get the more attention locally, and then sort of gets my attention. Firstly, someone must have pointed out to me. In fact, it was my colleague Suzanne, I think, pointed out to me the the conversation going on about the statue. I said, "Ooh, what conversation?" So I look it up, and there I suddenly see there's these petitions that have gone up, and very quickly got hundreds and then thousands of signatures. And I thought, wow, there's movement on this. So we were mostly busy helping the BLM youth organizations. Now, these are unaffiliated to some international Black Lives Matter. I mean, they were local ad hoc groups of college students who wanted to organize now the next rallies to keep the momentum going, to say to say something in solidarity with what was going on internationally and locally. And so we were mostly focused on that. And then our attention was sort of narrowed in as well on the statue. It was mentioned a few times at some of the rallies, the statue was. We had police reaching out about the rallies in order to say, "Ooh, we need you to contain it to the park there." They were worried that maybe a Black Lives Matter rally would go into the town square and there perhaps be clashes between groups at that statue. I think people were concerned that the same thing would happen. Our MP released a statement on the tremendous good of the empire, and we had one local councillor, Kuldeep Sahota Singh of Telford and Wrekin, a Labour councillor, who released an open statement, which was also an open letter sent to all of Shropshire councillors, detailing what the statue meant to him. Councillor Kuldeep, he spoke at one of our rallies as well, on my invitation, and he mentioned the statue there. And so the profile of that situation was increasing. And I suppose at that stage as well, I was contacting people like Councillor Sahota and others, and realizing, well, this is our moment to do something with this. So we formed a group called Shropshire Telford Wrekin Black Lives Matter BLM Auxiliary. I just wanted to use that word. It was just a Facebook group in order to bring together the various people who were messaging our SEMA page, other people who reached out personally, other people that we'd met at the rallies who wanted to be involved. And it was just a way to get us all on the same page, to get us doing the different bits and pieces, strategizing together. And that served a little purpose in terms of helping us organize the next rallies. It also became a place where we started to talk about what kind of statement we would make. So SEMA released a statement in response to our MP, Daniel Kaczynski. And then I had word that the next Shropshire Council meeting was soon, and it was going to be very soon, if not today, when I got informed that I'd have to submit something, because they were going to be discussing the statue, or perhaps they were going to be discussing the statue. And if we had to say anything, it was now, or perhaps they weren't even going to discuss it. But if we wanted them to discuss it, it would have to be now. And then began our correspondence with representatives of Shropshire Council, including their head of democratic services, who explained to us some of the process. And there was, over the next perhaps week or 2 weeks, the back and forth between us and them, really negotiating, even battling it out, in order to to say, well, what kind of statement can we make? What right of reply is there? What is the process? What's democratic about this? Until finally we get to send our statement to them, which they read out verbatim and then took a vote on.
So that would have been, I think, on like 20th July, for which I have the agenda, but we can cross-check that after the interview. What's really disappointing for me is that this statement is, at least I have not been able to find it online. So if I may request you, if you still have the text of that statement, could I write to you afterwards, get that statement off you, and then link it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, I've got it here.
Okay, thank you. That's really great. So I noticed, like from the online meetings, that the council decided not to take any action.
Yeah.
What happened actually after that?
Yeah, so our statement was read for us, our cut down statement. That was originally so many words and then was reduced. So we were limited to 900 words, approximately 5 minutes, and then we were limited to 550 words instead. So we kept having more and more sanctions put on the statement. So it was read for us. And then there was some comments from council, I believe, from my memory, there was some comments from certain members of the council, including council leader Peter Nutting, and they took a vote, and it was very unceremonious. They took a vote, and the vote was so many to so many in favor of no action. And that was that. And I was disappointed, but that was not going to be over. I thought, oh, how dare they? That's not, that was no end for me. That was just like a red flag to a bull. However, time actually did move on, and we were so busy with other things that it felt like it wasn't long before council then came to us, or at least the museum service approached us via email and said, we are going to put up an information board next to the statue. So that seemed to us a complete 180, and a good thing. And we received from them a provisional version of what it might say, and then began a process of saying to them, wow, that's not good enough. You've just put the bad bits in a very small sentence at the end, and it almost looks like it was an unintended consequence of business dealings, when really that's part and parcel of the process of colonization, of asset stripping a country. So this is what it ought to read like, and we were heated on that. I wrote that myself in correspondence with others, and it was a compromise. It was, what do we think is possible to say in Shropshire about this statue, in a way that tells the truth, but is going to get on the plaque. We wanted the truth to get there, and so it was a compromise. And yeah, we have a plaque now next to the statue. Like I said, it faces kind of an awkward angle. It's not in front. It's not next to it, but facing the same direction as the statue. It's facing off to a part of the town square, which is probably the angle that least people come at the statue from. So that's interesting. I'm sure a choice. And there's a big interpretation panel in the museum which says, I think maybe the exact same or roughly the same thing. And that's in the entrance of the museum. So it is pride of place, that one. And we were quite happy with the people from the museum service. They seem to have more interest in telling the truth than the council. So, okay, the museum's part of the council, but the museum staff themselves have a mind of their own.
That's very interesting to see like how allyship can be actually found in different places. And that's also something of a learning process on how this kind of contested heritage work is done. I want to acknowledge that we've gone over the hour because we started a bit late. Are you okay to continue another 10 minutes or would you
Oh
like?
yeah, that's no problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So one thing I noticed, and just because I'm now in the final bits of kind of the nitty-gritties, if you like, so I noticed that in after the initial decision of the council not to do anything formally in July 2020, in September 2021, there was a council question um, in which one of the members asked what had happened, and then they were told that the museum had been commissioned to do this work, which is what you had been describing. I also noticed that actually at that point in September 2021, it was reported that a temporary plaque had been set up for a while to prevent delays. And then eventually, of course, the final plaque was set up. Is this something that registered with you? Like, was there ever a temporary plaque? Do you remember it?
I believe there was a small A board.
What's an A board?
Like one which diagonally has an A shape.
Ah, I see.
Like you
Okay.
get outside of a cafe, perhaps.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay, right. So and you wouldn't have a photograph of that by any chance, or would some
Oh,
would you be
I'd
able to
have to
see?
go searching. I may do. Yes, I might have a photo of that somewhere way back in the archives of my phone.
Yeah, exactly. I just look up by year and month, but um, if you wouldn't mind at some point having a look, because it would be, I'm imagining that that A board would have been put up by the museum services themselves just as a placeholder, right? So you wouldn't have had any input into that.
No, not for that one from memory. I
Oh,
mean, it, yeah, I mean, it sometimes surprises me that a whole year and more went by between. So here I am saying it was like a red flag to a bull about their decision, but a year and more went by after that before, in fact, they approached us. So I suppose in truth, we didn't really keep up the fight there. It did go on the back burner in terms of it felt like it was, time goes so quickly, but it felt like it was still we will get this done. But we're such a very busy organization dealing with the kind of, the dailiness of what goes on here. And we're all working people as well that, yeah, a year and some months went by, which was surprising now that I hear that. Um, Yeah, that A board, I do seem to remember that, and being suspicious about it, like, oh, okay, what's going on here? This is interesting. And then shortly afterwards, having Martha from the museum service reach out to us.
I see. Thank you. So Martha has actually agreed to answer my questions in writing because she doesn't have time for an interview, but another of our colleagues will speak to me. So we might be able to piece together some of that, and
Yeah,
then I'll share it with you as well, because this is really a conversation together, not just me taking information from you. Um, So in the end, you had that writing process, and then, as you said, there were compromises, but then eventually you got that plaque installed, which I've seen, by the way, and I agree with you that it is nicely put off to the side, which is not the impact one wants to have. So the statue is still dominating, and this almost seems like a postscript or an afterthought or something like
Oh
that
yeah, it
visually.
it seems to me that way. We had input in, okay, the we were able to amend something that they had already sent to us. We didn't get, there wasn't any ceremony to put it up. In fact, goodness, if it happened at night time, or as early as possible in the morning, in order to not bring any attention to it, I wouldn't have been surprised if that's how that plaque got inserted into the stones neck, into the floor next to the statue. So no input into what it looked like, the direction it's facing, which seems the worst direction you could face it, the size of it, the anything, and also our organization is not mentioned on the plaque as well. So it at the very bottom underneath, almost, in my most cynical self wants to say it's almost self-congratulatory, because you've got the council naming themselves as like, oh, we this is an initiative of ours, and our organization is not to be seen in there, even though we were the final arbiters of what's written on there. I'm not sure if we'd want to be written on there, except to really say something of, and this is important too, of the history that has been made recently. So it's not just the old history, but there's people in the future as well who will be asking about the statue, and part of now the statue's afterlife or current life, its story now is our interventions in it and this battle that took place. And it really was a bit of a battle with council, even just to be heard, because of all of the ways they tried to limit and curtail what we were able to say to them. So to have our names not there on the plaque, to have the recording of that meeting, that council meeting, on the website without our statement even written there, is almost like we've been redacted.
Yes, indeed. I think I wouldn't have found out about you if I hadn't done two things. One, I um, I actually looked about on social media, and once again we are back to the internet, and I saw your organization's Facebook page, and I thought surely they must have had a role, and that was a hunch that was then confirmed when I contacted the museum.
Yeah.
So in
Do you,
fact, once again, self-led learning.
sorry to interrupt. Do you know, despite all that the Shropshire Star, for example, has reported on the various things, the statue, Black Lives Matter, it's great media for them. It draws in lots of comments, mostly really negative comments, really oppositional comments to anything that we try to do. We've never been interviewed ever by the Shropshire Star. I reached out to BBC West Midlands as well, and we have some great BBC people here. BBC Radio Shropshire is great, and they have had us before. But when it came to talking about Clive, I reached out to them at the time and never heard back. So we've mostly we sort of quietly go about our work. But I would have expected some of a bit more chance to speak and tell what I'm telling you now.
Well, in that case, I'm even more honored to have been able to host this conversation. And I do hope even if two more people listen to this, then we would have done something to actually add some positive knowledge to the public sphere,
Mm.
um, and not let it be redacted, like you said. Um, I have like some sort of future looking questions to wrap up what has been a really moving interview. And these are, in some ways, well, there's one practical question, and that question is, if you would summarize, and you have mentioned many of them, but overall, what do you think are the barriers that you have faced um, in what you have been trying to do, and what would you want to celebrate as your biggest successes?
Yeah, I would say as the big barrier, the constant barrier is sort of very integrated institutional, if not antagonism to what we're about, at least apathy. So when we go to a meeting with even, for example, people from the town council they've decided to have a cultural strategy. And it will be about revitalization of this or that, or how do we integrate parts of the county and people in the county who are less heard, less involved or maybe more marginalized, and they come to our organization. And we have our meetings with them, we participate, and things stay mostly exactly where they were. People are surprised at what we tell them about what it's like to be here, but not much changes. And being a small town council, being a relatively not small, but a very, very there seems to be near permanent structures in this county, and quite a lot of nepotism, and then within most people a fair bit of, I would say, apathy, and a fair bit of also disdain. People, I meet lots of people who are quite sick of hearing from unruly and noisy minorities, and people who they think are complaining and ought not to complain if we're lucky enough to be here. So that attitude we encounter a lot, and that is probably the main barrier to changing some of the stories, changing some of the conversations as we'd like to, more so than outward egregious racism. Although there's plenty of that too in Shropshire and everywhere else. So that's been a barrier at large, and I think that's what we experienced. Some of the bureaucracy of that, some of just the way that actually looks like in practice, minute by minute, as you're sending emails here, there, and everywhere in order to get a statement ready for a meeting that they haven't told you about until the last minute, for a process that they've obscured as much as possible, and then to have your statement cut and then cut and then cut again, and then even after the fact to be sort of removed from the record as if no controversy ever happened. That kind of bureaucratization of it is what we encountered here. So yeah, I'd say that's the biggest barrier. Yeah,
Yes, I
I'll do
can.
that.
It's a combination, isn't it, of the attitude and in a sense, the weaponization of bureaucracy, as we would say.
Yeah.
Um, and I also asked you about what is your feeling is the greatest success that you have achieved.
With regards to the statue, or with regards to broader?
I think broader, because I mean, it seems clear to me, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the statue cannot be isolated from
Mm.
the broader matters.
So I think the slow, mostly very behind the scenes work, that we do, a lot of that which cannot be really spoken about because it's sensitive. A lot of what we've managed to do, and a lot of it had a great was greatly helped by the Black Lives Matter moment, if you like, which brought so many people together, has been that we now have such a big network. I have, and my organization have worked very hard, but also just naturally come to know a load of people who live here and have the same experiences. And so now there's many of us, it feels like. When I first came here, I mean, I know I was a new one, as other people have already been here for ages, but it felt very isolated, and we felt isolated from each other. Now in Shropshire, I think most of the things that used to go on, even 10 years ago, they don't operate with such impunity now. There's no door staff at a club who will say something racist to me now. I'm too influential for that at this stage. I have friends who are in council. We have people who are lawyers. We have connections with the police, emergency services, and every other sort of governing body, statutory body. We work in schools. We work with trade unions. We work with other anti-racist organizations and charities as well. We, behind the scenes, have taken institutional power. I was always inspired by, always learning from the idea of Black Power, which is a movement, a moment, an ideology, but also a program. We have to get power. People have to get institutional power, create your own institutions, networks, power bases, numbers. So we've managed to do that in Shropshire. So now people, I feel safe now in Shrewsbury. I walk the streets now. I'm very privileged. I don't stick out for the color of my skin. But I do think perhaps Shrewsbury is has come some way. I think some of the institutions that we work with have come some way, and that's been through the conversations that we have. I do want to think that our presence has made a difference, and there's so much more work to do, and there's still so much danger, particularly for people who are visibly minoritized. So we're talking Black and brown people, particularly within this county, face the precariousness which I will never experience. So there's so much work to do, but I think that's the success. We are now strong.
You just put a huge smile on my face. I felt so much joy when you said all that.
Thank you.
What you've done. Very, very small things. I mean, you've actually reduced the statue to something very small, actually, by saying what you've said in this interview. But in an ideal world, what would happen to this statue, if that does matter at all?
Well, we gave the council, and I'll send you the statement, but we gave them three options: either ignore us, do nothing, keep it. But here's two options that you could do, that both of which are acceptable to us. And one was remove it, but not just remove it, replace the statue with any of the wonderful Salopians, that's what we call Shropshire folk, who we can all be proud of. The war poet Wilfred Owen, Eglantine Jebb, Agnes Hunt. So we've got great names locally. which we could all be proud of. That would be reclaiming of the town square, which is the public space, which should belong to each of us, be a safe and a place to be. That would be great. And so I think not just the negative sense of taking away what is ugly, anachronistic, hot, all of the things. Not just to remove Clive, but to replace with something positive. But also, if we were to remove that statue, I don't want the statue out of sight. This is why we gave two options. Firstly, our organization doesn't speak for all groups. We really we had to get busy. We had to do something straight away, and so we led the charge and wrote the statement, which was sent to council. But I knew there was a diversity of opinion, and one opinion is that we don't want that history out of sight, because then they sweep it under the rug. It's too easy to disappear it and say, oh, it never happened. I think we got the solution I most wanted. Even with a perhaps not as strong statement on the plaque as I would have wanted. I thought, if people are going to be proud of this, let them say what they're proud of. Let the statue itself declare what it represents. And then we really have a testimony, perhaps even more to what empire means, what colonialism means, and what it means to have monuments like this erected in celebration of these achievements. I think the outcome that we got was what we could do with what we had. I think one thought I had from the get-go was, as much as in my emotions I would tear that thing down, I thought I would never dare do that on behalf of other people. If I were to tear that down, nobody's looking out for somebody who looks like me in order to take that out on. But they are looking for my sister. They are looking for Black and brown people in this county, who are very few, who have very little recourse to self-defense. So that would be an awful thing to do here in Shropshire. I think that's quite different in Bristol. That is not possible here out in the countryside. So that was impossible. So I think we've done what we could with what we had. And also, I'm glad for having a testimony of Shropshire's real links to that global empire, that colonialism. I think the story, more history can be told with what we have than if we remove the statue and put it in some nook in a corner of a museum service somewhere.
Wonderful. I want to end on a word, which is heritage. What does that word? I mean, these statues have been now classified as contested heritage, and there's a range of other terms around it. What do you think of heritage? Do you think what does it mean, and does it matter? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think it matters hugely. I think I can understand, I think, why I meet folks who are feeling like their heritage is under attack. But I wish to say to them, in one sense, those same people deny that this heritage has anything to do with them. So, we didn't go and colonize you, nothing to do with me. And at the same time, if you then attack the very same thing that they disassociate from, then you're attacking their heritage. So it's like, it seems to be a no-win, but we're in this no-win all together, right? We have to be neighbors together. We simply live next in the same town. So what do we do? So I think it's important to find ways to shift that conversation about heritage and say, look, we all have our stories, that we all have our ancestors. We have all sorts of things to be proud of. Let's choose the things that we can be proud of. I mean, there's great testimonies in this county to working class struggles against industrialists. So that there you have a story which firstly is set within the world where the Industrial Revolution of Britain's taking place, fueled by the deindustrialization of India, and also the enslavement going on in the Americas and the cotton empires over there, an expansion of British mercantile and sort of financialized interests all across the globe. So it links us to the bigger picture, and maybe there's ways there where if we looked at normal working class folks right here in Shropshire, we're fighting for rights in the factories and in the on the building sites, in the mills and everything else. We can start to build a conversation around how, I suppose, how big business, how empire does a disservice to us all, and how it's put us against each other, feeling like, through racialization, has made us feel like we're different from each other. But we need to look at what power dynamics were going on. We need to own up to the racism that we have swallowed whole and that we have justified. And yeah, take pride in some of what can be taken pride of, instead of stuff like it. Instead of a symbol like this, which I suppose I want to say that most people I know, I feel like most people I know, if you explain to them that sometimes a person can be doing something that's actually really horrible to another person, and once they realize that, they'll stop the behavior. I suppose maybe in my naivety, I still want, in my conversations with local people, that for the conversation to go in that direction, or sort of a recognition that, yeah, this is heritage, and it's something we need to own up to. But it's also something we can. I don't know. Maybe I've lost my clarity in this one. Maybe perhaps I'm not sure. I would start again, but I think maybe I'll rant more. So.
Did I interrupt you? I was just saying that it seemed very clear to me and very future looking.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful interview, which actually, as interviewer and listener at the same time, had me go through such a range of emotions, from real despondency, actually, as you talked about the pain and humiliation, to real joyfulness and hope. And I hope those who listen to this will not only be informed, but also feel similarly emotionally moved by this. Thank you so much, Alex.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I do hope I haven't spoken out of turn at any point. Sometimes it's far too easy for a moment for my mind to be talking about one kind of we or us language, and then to realize mid-sentence that it's sounding like I might be saying like that we're all in the same boat, or that someone with my migration experience is in the same situation as another person, when that's clearly could not be the case. So maybe I wanted to add that little addendum to beg for forgiveness for some little slips in my language there, as I was trying to untangle perhaps some of what has gone on for me with some of what's gone on for some of my colleagues, or some of my family. Somehow in Shropshire, being as we're all a very small group who have had to link with each other, despite coming from very different backgrounds and different levels of privilege vis-a-vis each other, somehow there's become this us, which is sometimes hard to untangle when you're talking about it.
Well, thank you very much for that disclaimer, which once again is something which I feel ought to be a learning point for those who listen to this. To me, you sounded extremely sophisticated and sensitive, but that's for listeners to judge. But it seemed to me also from what you said that there's a fine balance, of course, between conflation and solidarity. And you talked so much about solidarity as well, which is also something really valuable.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot.